So I was saying before that the art of building requires knowledge of laying a good foundation. And today in civil engineering, we have a quantity surveyor in our midst to verify this. It requires good planning to start with. You have to dewater the area. It can be a lot of water, a lot of mud and so on that goes with it. But then you have to reinforce the concrete these days and make a good foundation. So that is the same thing in our life. And why we are talking particularly about foundation is because it is the 19th year of the foundation of the Vedanta Society, and it is the 7th anniversary of our inauguration, that is, inauguration as an official branch center, affiliated branch center of the Ramakrishna Math mission, or more officially the Ramakrishna Math. And the reason for that was because when we set this up in 2006, we gave the directors of the organization we set up, that was called Institute of United Culture in those days, and we passed a resolution that if Bellumat wanted to take us over, they could, because that is the way of laying a foundation that bears fruit for the next 1,000 years or not just for the next few months or the next year or something like that. So I would like to think that a good foundation has been laid. Now, a few historical things, because people have different narratives. But in 2006, we started off meeting in people's houses, sometimes meeting in a garage where they sold cars. We had a small structure, and nowhere did I ever appoint myself any office holder. I was simply a spiritual director, and the presidency, we had a structure of president and those kinds of things to make it official and to register it as a company. We were completely focused on hand-to-mouth kind of operation. So in other words, whatever donations came in, at the end of the year, we dispersed the whole thing to charity. So nothing was left, because we're not a registered charity and we didn't want funds left over. They were of some use. Half of them at the end of the year in December would have gone to local charities, and the other half would have gone to people in need or causes run by the Ramakrishna Mission in India. All addressed to the General Secretary, sometimes with specific instructions, let's say for women's education, or in some cases there was flood relief, etc. We kept in touch with the needs. That was 2006, and we were a close band of people who were very thirsty. Why? Because we were bringing new ideas unfamiliar to the island of Ireland. And although these ideas would have been around in mystic periods, what that means is around about, let's say, the 4th, 5th centuries, Ireland was an entirely spiritual country, and the abbots were very powerful, and the reputation of the great saints, many and varied. When I first came to Ireland, I hadn't a clue about these saints. I'd never heard of these saints. We had just come back from Glendalough, dominated really by the saintly life of Saint Kevin. And he was one of those who built beehive huts out of stone and was prepared to live the life of an anchorite, following the example of the Desert Fathers, who in their turn were looking for some discipline of self-will on the back of the martyrs of early Christendom. Understanding that to deprive yourself or to renounce things, to discipline the mind and the body was a worthwhile cause. Now, in modern times, you wouldn't think that's a worthwhile cause. Most people don't think it is so. We are surrounded by modern technology of different kinds. And we were just talking a little bit, or touched on the subject of AI, artificial intelligence. We are entering into a world where, in terms of warfare, soldier combatants don't seem to be necessary anymore, or very seldom. It is now all remote control stuff. You send something from a distance, ballistic missiles, drones, all kinds surveillance aircraft. So man is detaching himself from the dangerous consequences of the advanced technology that eventually results in sophisticated engineered bombs, highly destructive, where civilians are automatically involved. That's the tragedy of it. So in this age of technology, that's the destructive side of things. The constructive side of things is that artificial intelligence is now taking over many, many functions, doing them more efficiently. Even long back, of course, in factories, robots were assembling cars and machines and machinery and so on. They're all done like that. Welding and so on was all done by that. And factories learned that properly designed automatic machines could do most of the work, much of the work, maybe except quality control or something like that. So they are preoccupied. Along with that comes the preoccupation, additional to that, of entertainment, where we are drawn outwards. And the whole purpose of making a foundation of a Vedanta society is to teach people the reverse, to go inward. And when we talk about foundational principles, we're really talking about something higher of an impersonal idea or ideal. The outcome of philosophy that tells us that the idea of a personal God is not sufficient. Religions will have it. So Ireland will have it, along with their theology, along with doctrine and dogma, that enters into the culture of this country in a monolithic way. And to a large extent, that is still there, except, of course, the influx of other people, skilled people from other countries with other cultures, has dampened that to some extent. Even so, statistically, about 68% of the population are still affiliated, at least from a on paper point of view, as Roman Catholic. Fastest growing religion here in Ireland is the Romanian Orthodox Church. The Romanian Orthodox Church has found huge growth, and because I'm part of the Dublin City Interfaith Forum, I've seen this great shift. And of course, we've seen the rise of Islam, as we have found everywhere in Europe. And so that's a significant thing, so that we would think that maybe by 2030, something like that, Islam will be the second largest religion in the country. So there's been this huge dramatic shift in cultures and therefore religion, because religion is a cornerstone of cultures. But what we mean by religion? In Vedanta, and he quotes Swami Vivekananda, religion is defined as realization. And so realization is what we are looking for. Realization of what? Realization of a united oneness. And that we call Brahman. That approach would have been foreign when we started off in 2006. And so this band of pioneering people were interested in this new thing. And maybe they had heard a little bit about yoga and so on, but that was something a little weird in those days. But still, we were faced with these new things called Upanishads. Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and so on. And it was difficult for people to understand. It's not a religion as such, it's a philosophy. When we first came here and introduced myself here in Mulhuddet to the Roman Catholic priest at the time, who was actually a Monsignor, he asked me, "But what religion are you?" And I said, "I'm not a religion, we're a philosophy." And he couldn't get his head around that. So what's the point of having a philosophy? Some people might think, oh, philosophy is, something like Plato and Socrates, something like, the German philosophers and so on. And if you see the flavor, particularly of the German philosophers like Kant and all that, although they were trying to address serious problems of ontology, being, it was more or less theoretical. And common people would have been out of touch with that. You'd have to go to university to study that as a specialist subject, and nothing very practical about it, seemingly. But the most ancient philosophy is there, the Vedanta philosophy. It goes way, way back, and even before Plato and so on, Socrates and all that. This is the original, well thought out philosophy. And it didn't develop just from nowhere. It developed as a kind of evolution of ideas. We're starting off with the Samhitas of the Vedas, which were keen to have a dualistic system, thinking that there was a God who was a creator, there were many other forces which were there, and we could see by observing nature all this was praiseworthy, and also they were there to try and define some cosmological principles involved in it as well. And then there were the Brahmanas that would explain the ritual of the mantras or the yajnas, the sacrifices that the Samhitas were aimed at. And then, of course, there were the Aranyakas and the Upanishads, the forest documents and the discussions that tried to simplify without destroying. And that's a wonderful characteristic. So when we have a foundation itself of philosophy, of a living, practical philosophy, then we don't destroy anything. We don't say, we'll stop this, stop your rituals, stop this one-on-one worship. No. We take it, but we upgrade it. We don't go from error to truth. We go from truth to higher truth. We make it more sophisticated. Instead of having an image or a temple, man itself is the image, and the body itself is the temple, and the universe itself is the cosmic temple. And all of the items that you'll find in man and you'll find in the universe as such. And all of it tied together, indicating that there is only one thing. So what is our aim? The highest possible conclusion of experience is this oneness. And that's the outcome then. And so we have gone beyond the personal God, which most people take as religion. Have gone beyond the concepts of heaven, where there is a name and a form. And if there's a name and a form, it's subject to time and space, and therefore it is temporary. It is not permanent. It cannot be infinite. It can only be finite. So while these terms are convenience terms, and we don't destroy them, and we say, yes, they are there, we give a different meaning to it and say, and by the way, ultimately, all of this is to do with phenomena. All of this is to do with name and form. It's also all to do with the finite world. You cannot have, and Swami Vivekananda points this out in his lectures on practical Vedanta. And he says, if you have a finite cause that produces an infinite result, infinite heaven, your good or bad deeds producing an infinite condition, it doesn't make any sense. A finite cannot produce an infinite thing. And so this one principle without a second, this supreme teaching, has to be taught step by step within the context and confines of people's cultural understandings, religious understandings. You teach in the language that people understand. Teach in the religious concepts that people understand. Try not to shake that out. And within that, you teach what you can. Now, this is not a new technique, because you see Buddha sent Buddhist missionaries out, and so many varieties of Buddhism was there simply because whatever religion was there was left intact, and Buddhism was put on the top. And that is the way they preserved not only Buddhism, but also the previous system where a syncretization was taking place. Exactly the same thing happened in the foundations of Christianity. Now, how we take for granted the fact that we have Christianity and we think that it goes back to Jesus, but without Paul, there is nothing there. And the earliest Christian mystical or Christian biblical texts were actually 7 letters of St. Paul. I know you'll say there are 13 letters there, but scholars will say only 7 we take as authentically written by Paul, and the rest, although they have his name, apart from Hebrews, will be in the flavor of Paul. That's it. will give us Pauline ideas, probably. And then those ideas would have filtered to the Gospel of Mark. And we can see the evolution of a religion. And so it took some 300 years and odd, 350 years, to lay a foundation that was called Christianity. And the Nicene Creed, which most Christians recite in one way or another, would be the result, really, of the Council of Nicaea. And we are talking about the 4th century. So it takes time to develop a foundation. And what we've done here in Ireland is to lay a very, very basic foundation. But it took a lot of time. That's okay. It means it's worthwhile. Take your time to build a foundation. Now, who are the people who contribute toward this foundation? They also have to build their own personal foundation. You cannot have a growth of any plant, for example, without a seed. The seed has to be looked after. And the growth itself occurs from within. Same thing with an institution. The only thing is that the dangers of the growth in spiritual life and the dangers of the growth in an institution are very similar. Growth is stunted in individual life by selfishness, egoism. It's the very antithesis of spiritual life. It's the very antithesis of unity. So self-interest coming first is our big obstacle. It's referred to by Patanjali in the sutras as klesha. First comes avidya, ignorance, and then what will come from there is the first ignorant position, thinking that you are an individual and protecting yourself in an individual way, like any other biological species, and without any higher ethics or morality, we will be fighting each other tooth and nail. And you may say, we notice that's already happening in the world. And yes, that's true. But in the world, this idea of a nation, of a country, with an ownership and a people and a culture and protectionism of it, all of that is really an extension of this ego. Then in terms of an institution, the ego comes out as an exclusiveness. We are different, we are exclusive, we're a kind of a club. And then group interests can develop. And those group interests can be threatening and dangerous and automatically excluding others. And so that is against all the principles of a universal philosophy that has to appeal to everybody. There's a danger. We find the danger in our religions, which says, only my way, only my God. That kind of exclusivity. Taking tea only with your friends. The whole thing is like taking tea anyway. You resolve, I'll never take tea with my enemies. I won't indulge them. I won't talk to them. I'll exclude them. I'll turn my nose up at them. And if we apply that socially and apply that even politically and apply that in spiritual life or religious life, there's nothing to do with spirituality, religious life anyway, then we're out for warfare. Swami Vivekananda was keen to say, more blood has been shed in the name of God and religion than any other cause in the world. And he was speaking, of course, before the last 2 world wars. Then the second danger, of course, will be institutional protectionism. You protect your institution at all costs. That also creates a barrier. In personal life or personal growth, it comes out as, I'll protect not only my ego and surrounding ego, but I'll also protect the things that go with it, property, for example. And I'll create a desire which will be of self-interest. And the desire, of course, will be, could be easily acquiring this desire in an unethical way. But even if it's in an ethical way, it still comes back to egoism. And so an institution can have the same difficulty. Even though there may be scandals within the institution, then in protecting the institutional at all costs, in law courts and by compensation and all the rest of it, we have seen examples of that in modern times. And maybe it's still going on, but at least those institutions recognize it and are trying to do something about it. But it's difficult because you think that your institution is the best. You think that your prophet actor complex self is the best, and you will try and protect it. And part of your cultural interests will be religion, personal cultural interests. And then the third one will be all tied in with the same selfishness, lack of love, lack of charity, lack of compassion, lack of concern for the others. That also is a blockage in your own spiritual life, a tremendous obstacle. So let's review again. In your personal spiritual life, overall selfishness. And then in terms of selfishness, a kind of exclusivity, a kind of bias, putting yourself in a social context, or even in a status context, or you might even say, even in a caste context. But love, the more you expand that, the better it is, the more spiritual you are. Because anybody can have genetic love. I love my family. Yes, so what? Dogs love their family, alligators love their family, birds love their family. Nothing unusual, nothing special. I was talking to somebody, they said, oh, my parents, I wasn't brought up in a religious environment, but my parents were good people, and they said, just be a good person. There's a lot of merit in that, of course, but it's also just maintenance, mere maintenance. Something extra is required. And when we take up spiritual life, something extra is required. Just as if you're learning some craft or some art or some new science or some new skill, you can't just automatically fall into it. It requires step 1, step 2, step 3, step-by-step training. And that requires resolution. It requires will. It requires scheduling. It requires systematization. It requires steadiness. It requires commitment. All of these things it requires. Same for institutions. So institutional protectionism is anathema to it, and lack of love, particularly in our institution, because it's not just a company or something. It is designed to be a living example, above all else, of the noble principles of the Vedanta, and that is the principles of pure love. The idea of a personal God shouldn't be destroyed, but it has to be supplemented. It has to be seen to be an avenue, a way. And all these rituals and so on associated with the personal devotion has to be understood as part of the way, part of the path. And the impersonal is the only thing that can be infinite, because the personal is inherently limited. When you talk of God in a personal way, it's all very noble. It's a good step, but actually unlimited. Sri Ramakrishna gives this wonderful example of water. Water is impersonal. Water flows everywhere. In other words, it's not exactly confined. It's a fluid thing. And the example, analogy. And then the coolness, the cool breeze of the devotion, the devotee's devotion, makes the water into ice. The sun of knowledge melts it again back into the water. So knowledge is necessary. The Christian says you must do this and not do that on the basis that a Bible or some scripture says it, or some interpretation of it. And that won't be binding on those who don't believe in the Bible. So therefore it's not universal. Millions of people are ready to believe in a personal creator, for example. And there have been thousands of the brightest minds in the world who felt that such ideas were just not sufficient for them. And they wanted something higher. And this is more true now today than may have been in the past, except, of course, it must have been there for the Upanishads to develop in their own right. And to take stories and analogies suitable to illustrate step by step something a child could understand, that all the knowledge is within us and comes from within us. And that the final conclusion really is that everything is just this one infinite. Devotional language, see God in everyone, but you have to bring it to a point where your first thing that you look at, whether it's a table, a chair, a person, whatever it is, you register immediately that's God. And then thereafter, recognize God is also in, and so on and so forth. But as God, that would be the difference between the personal approach and the impersonal approach. And it is this impersonal approach that ultimately we want to teach the Vedanta and lay the foundations of that, doing it progressively, step by step. I always remember in the beginning, and we were meeting at a place which was called Sonatra, near Bettystown, and at an ecology center. And there were two people who used to come on a regular basis, eventually only one. There were more than two people, but two people who used to come together, friends. I said, what happened to this person? Oh, he says, he can't understand anything you say. So he says, I'll never come again. And you, do you understand? No, I also don't understand. But I'll come again and again until I do. And that's the difference. I remember that our chairperson at the time, our president actually was the title. If in a small group, one person was missing, he'd phone them up and harass them. Where were you on Tuesday? We kept Tuesday like we do now. Where were you? Oh, I'm sorry, I did this and that and the other. Kept everything together. A kind of camaraderie there that is the key element to building foundation of an institute such as ours. A kind of fraternal, sororital feeling amongst us which says we're all looking for truth. We're all trying to investigate in our own way. And we have no guidance other than this person who came from Africa. That was the idea. Of course, in 2009, another organization started called Vedanta Society of Ireland. And I'm not sure if I mentioned that. Why not mention the names, actually? But Anita Sen started off in good faith, a wonderful devotee of the Biru Mutt and a Bengali and so on. And she started a small group in Leopardstown. And we came to know of each other. So 3 years after our foundation, she came to know, and I came to know her, and she came to know me, and I was invited to go and give some talks, which I did. They met about once a month, if they could, and sometimes also in different people's houses. So it made sense for us to join forces, and we proposed it, but for some reason or other, they didn't want it. 3 times we proposed it, 3 times they said no thank you. And so we left it like that. But the idea of affiliation was still deeply held in my mind, because that's the way of ensuring that not only the foundation is laid, but other things will be laid on top of that as time goes on. So ultimately, we had a visit, and the visit was at the invitation. Anita Sen had the habit of inviting people from Belumat, also the General Secretary of the Sharda Mutt. And so they came, they stayed nicely at her house and so on, and we took them up to Dungannon. In 2011, we went up to Dungannon. We formed a small group there. A great devotee there was putting on a play there in Sister Nivedita's birthplace and established a conference there. And I invited the Sens up to the conference, and also a family belonging to Devi Singh, and brought them all up, and we attended the conference, beautiful conference. We made friends for the first time there as well, and made inroads there. As time went on, and invited Swamis were told, please, when you go back, please take this donation with you. And we always gave a donation. We took that back to Belumat, also with my letter to the General Secretary. We had passed this resolution in 2006 that if Belumat wanted to take us as a branch center, they can do it. We'd happily yield to that. And so That letter was taken back by the treasurer, the trustee of the Ramakrishna Mountain Mission. And the next thing we know was advances were being made. Meeting with me was set up. And many people were signatories to the start of an application for affiliation. And then, of course, we had to raise funds. We raised funds through various means. The whole process, a project called Swami on the Bike, those who know me know what that means. And we raised some funds. We raised it from 6,000 euros to the amount that was required, 200,000, more than that, because other costs would have been there. I had specified to the board at the time that you have to look for a place. It must be no more than about 13 kilometers from the center of the city. We'd already been renting a premises in the city, having had temporary premises everywhere else for a short time, and before that, simply meeting in people's houses. And so we started raising funds. It cannot cost more than 200,000. It has to be near a school. It has to have provision for a shrine, provision for at least 2 monks to stay, with facilities and so on, like that. And it must be near a bus route, and there has to be parking facilities, things like that. Well, we acquired premises that exactly met that requirement. Exactly opposite a school. It's in the vicinity of a holy place, that is Holy Lady's Well, a holy well. So in the ancient days, the pre-Christian days, all wells, all trees, and so on and so forth were deemed holy by the Celtic traditions. And when Patrick came along, St. Patrick, he synchronized, or syncretized is the word, syncretized the original religion which was there, building on the top of it, not fighting with anybody. In fact, I think it took something like about 200 years or something to establish properly Christianity as an entrenched system. And in the meantime, within that period of time, great saints, great scholars grew up in the country and rescued, as it were, Christianity in Europe, whole of Europe. They brought the scholarliness, the thinking, and the holiness everywhere. There was St. Columbanus, who then went and ended up in France, on the French-German border, French-Swiss border, and established monasteries there, which can be visited today. So far and wide, these people traveled. In the meantime, Vikings also did some traveling. So by the 10th century or so, there were 9th and 10th century, the Vikings were raiding coasts and doing it very widely. I'm told they even carried their boats across land and arrived at the ancient land of Persia, astonished at the level of civilization there. And then they took their boats back into the Red Sea area and went by that and circumambulated. And we know that they arrived in America also, so like that extensively, but also settled down. And of course, the Norman conquest, which took hold of England, ultimately came by Irish invitation here as well to Ireland. Why am I saying all of this? Because they were also building a foundation. They built a foundation for Christianity here. And so it wasn't long before Ireland was the most Christian country in the whole of Europe. When Pope John Paul II visited the country, there still is in the Phoenix Park a cross that is there to commemorate his visit. Millions and millions of people went. At that point, over 90% of the population were Roman Catholic, and there's been a decline since. How is this relevant to our own foundation? It is because we were instrumental, there's no doubt, being used by the divine to establish Vedanta here in Ireland at exactly the right time when there was a decline in trust, for example, and practice of the indigenous Roman Catholic religion. And Of course, there's a decline of interest in the whole of Europe as such, but now it took hold of Ireland itself. And that is exactly the time when we know that people are registering more as agnostic or as atheistic or what have you. And we have the answers within agnosticism and atheism, as well as Christianity, as well as Judaism and Islam, and all the religions you can think of and none. And we are the only system that can happily embrace all of them because our philosophy can do it. And so that is the nature of the Vedanta, the nature of that sense of oneness, away from specific religions, which have not only a personal God, we also have it, but that have this idea of exclusiveness. In Swami Vivekananda's lecture, Practical Vedanta, he puts it like this: why religions should claim that they are not bound to abide by the standpoint of reason, no one knows. If one does not take the standard of reason, there cannot be any true judgment, even in the case of religions. One religion may ordain something very hideous. For instance, the Mohammedan religion allows Mohammedans to kill all who are not of their religion. It's clearly stated in the Quran, kill the infidels if they do not become Mohammedans. They must be put to fire and sword. Now we have to put a caveat to that, that not all Muslims would subscribe to that necessarily, and logically be having abhorrence about it. But we can see how a misunderstanding or misinterpretation of things or a reading can be conveniently used for man's inhumanity against man. Then he says that if you will tell them that this is wrong, they'll naturally ask, how do you know that? How do you know it's not good? My book says it is. And if you say your book is older, they will become the Buddhist and say, my book is much older still. And then we come across the Hindus and they say, well, my books are the oldest of all. And so each one is defending their own books. That's the problem. Therefore, of course, referring to books won't do. So where's the standard by which we can compare? He will say, look at the Sermon on the Mount. And the Muslim will reply, look at the ethics of the Quran. And so on. So goes on, the arbitrator of it. And then we come to the Upanishads. And the Upanishads will say, well, we can accommodate you all, actually. Your is one interpretation here, but when you have everything all dissolved into this oneness, that everything is only one, the monistic theory has a merit that it is the most rational of all the religious theories that we can conceive of. And he says every other theory, every conception of God which is partial and a little and personal is not actually rational. And that is something picked up by neo-atheists today, people defending atheism, inherently being materialistic, pointing these things out. So we can no longer live with that, and that is where we come in. So the timing is exactly right. Now, how to build that foundation? We won't do it, as I mentioned, through group interest. We won't do it by institutional protectionism. And we definitely have to have all the demonstrable qualities and attributes that we would expect from people who are generous in spirit. Their speech is kind and beneficent. Their attitude is charitable. They are overflowing examples of love for all. On what basis? They find no distinction anywhere. Wherever they look is only God. Even if they look at a chair or a cup or a plate, God, that's their first thing. God, something else after that. That's how the idea is. Of course, the central idea of this monism, and one that is so hard to understand, but it has been taught and it has been the realization, and when we look at the logic of it, then we can easily reconcile ourselves, at least intellectually, with it. And then we have to catch it up. We have to catch the emotions up. And that is the basis for the love. The basis for the love would be this non-distinction found everywhere. The whole of that big banyan tree, which covers acres of ground, says Swami Vivekananda, was in the little seed, which was perhaps no bigger than 1/8 of a mustard seed. All that massive energy was there confined. The gigantic intellect, we know, lies coiled up in the protoplasmic cell. And why should not the infinite energy? We know that is so. It may seem like a paradox, but it is true. Each one of us has come out of one protoplasmic cell, and all the powers we possess were coiled up there. You cannot say they came from food, for if you heap up food mountains high, what power comes out of it? The energy was there, potentially, no doubt. So this idea of everything coming down to a oneness, logically we know energy boils down to one thing. Mass or matter boils down to one thing. So also, this highest point of spirituality is your own nature and comes down to one thing. And so if we're in an institution like that, it's something that we should be practicing. It's something that people will see as an obvious thing. You take the great examples of all the great teachers, how Jesus overflowed with love, how Buddha overflowed with compassion, how Ramakrishna overflowed with both of these things, and intellectual wisdom and knowledge. How all of these overflowed, obviously, inescapably touching everyone's life that came into contact with them. Spreading like a divine kind of infection everywhere, leaving everybody in a blissful, joyful state. And so, if you want to build a solid foundation, we have to be a living example of our principles, demonstrable for the whole world to see. And again, as I say, not engendering group interests or institutional protectionism, or even one word of uncharitableness, even one word of criticism. See the generosity of the Holy Mother. Make every stranger feel at home. Make the whole world your own. Don't find fault with others if you want peace of mind. Find fault with your own self. But these are eternal principles found for everyone. And if you contravene this, as it were, it is just evidence that you are operating from your individual life cell, which will come and will go. Sooner or later, it'll go in a flash. Prepare your will now, because it'll happen. It may be tomorrow, it may be next year, it may be in 50 years' time, but it will happen. And what impact did we make? Did we leave people with shiny eyes and smiling faces? Did our personality become like a beacon, like an enormous light that enlightened others and left people uplifted and joyful? Think, when you have your own demise, what will people say? What will they put on the tombstone? He never laughed. He was miserable. He always saw things negatively. Or he was always joyous. He always enlightened us. We always left his company feeling uplifted. Something like that. So that is how we should be. That is how we should be. The foundations of every religion would have been like that. The followers of Buddha would have been like that. Followers of Jesus would have been like that. And so also the followers of Ramakrishna were like that. And we should all follow in those footsteps. So what is special about making a foundation? Well, one person can do it. A group of people can do it. But then another person, another group will lay a better pathway. Another will lay a road. Another will lay a highway, and so it grows. And may it grow like that. And so it all comes from the foundation. And it all comes from a concerted communal effort, everybody involved. Sure, yes, it begins with the divine impulse on the one side and inspiration on the one side. But also the infusion of a divine response on the other, so that the two come together. And of course, in every institution, there may be some cracks and disagreements and what have you, but if people understand the central principles and stick, not just morality, not just ethics, it's not just a corporation, it's something more than that. It's something most profound that transforms people's lives and directs people to this freedom of oneness with the Supreme, where the lover and the beloved merge into one thing. So these are some understandings. And so the foundation of our organization also relies on the foundation of people's own spiritual life. And so may that grow from strength to strength. On this occasion, 7th anniversary of our affiliation and the 19th year of our foundation. Thank you all for all your efforts. Without that, nothing would be happening. But it's only instrumental. We are only instruments of the divine. As soon as we put our small ego in there, it's destroyed. The ego is the destroyer of it. So let us all have that generosity of spirit, love for each other. Om Shanti, 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 peace, peace, peace be unto all. And before you depart, next Tuesday I will be here, I'll be in Waterford. And thereafter, there's a program in the UK and so on. So, but I will be back on the 8th of July.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Om